Grandpa begged for me to stay. He said he needed me. He needed me. My grandfather was my hero. But that farm was a very, very important part of my life. This was a turkey that was kind of a nuisance, but was very, very tame and pretty darn good eating too. They got married in Fort Dodge, and apparently he loaded her up in the back of a wagon with a barrel of flour and a barrel of sugar, and took her up to that log cabin. Well, that was the farm where my grandfather, Boyden, my mother's father, was born. And that's why I've got the name Boyden. His name was Samuel Frederick Boyden also. And my grandfather was my hero when I was a little kid. Eventually, when I was just a real small kid, and you've seen that picture of me with my sister and my cousin, that was taken on my grandpa and grandpa's porch. And my grandpa left the banking business and did some traveling for some insurance and so forth. And then when the Depression really hit, he had double mortgaged his farm that he had inherited from his father up in northern Iowa. And in 1931, my grandma and Grandpa Boyden went back up to the farm, and they salvaged that farm, stayed there and paid off the mortgage. But that farm was a very, very important part of my life. 1935, I spent a summer there with Grandma and Grandpa. Wonderful summer. I was the first grandchild and the only grandchild for 15 months. So I was in a very, very honored position in the family. I was kind of privileged to both sides of the house. He was a great storyteller, and he would show up at my house at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning and say to my mother, "I want to take Bob with me." And he'd take me all day long and talk. We'd drive and then bring me back home. And he did that many, many times and so forth. And he wanted me to spend this time with him in the farm. And talked my parents into letting me stay for the summer. And I'd never been away from home, away from my folks until that time. And he spent so much time with me, talking to me, telling me stuff about the family, about the farm, all that sort of thing. A lot more than my dad was. My own dad was always working, and Grandpa took the time to be with me. My Grandpa Boyden's father left this section of land that he had, which is 640 acres. The north half, 320 acres, he left to his oldest son. The youngest son got 220 acres because they gave each one of my grandfather's sisters 50 acres apiece. He was a tremendously hard worker. He had an Oliver tractor that didn't have tires. It had these big claws on them, you know. And he had a team of horses. He finally got a team of horses. He built a silo and he got a hold of a food grinder, and he was so resourceful he even ground the rye that he raised to make rye flour, because my grandma baked home-baked rye bread. I mean, and starting, they had a huge vegetable garden. My grandmother canned. She raised chickens and eggs, and I can remember every Saturday afternoon the eggs that we would take to the grocery store, and I wiped all of the crap off of the eggs and everything else, so that, because you got a penny more a dozen for the eggs if they were clean. You know, I mean, things were really tough back in those days, you know, and the finances were quite different. The thing that really wooed me on staying with Grandpa, clinched the deal for my staying up there, was my grandfather, as resourceful as he was, measured cornfields for the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA, allowed them to raise only so many acres of corn. Well, all of these farmers that signed on to that program wanted to know whether they had the right number of acres, so Grandpa went around and measured. He had 10 days to measure the farms in the field, in the area that he had to cover. He needed somebody to carry the chain to measure. We had 100-foot tape and 10 stakes, and we'd measure 1,000 feet. Well, I followed him, and he could pay the guy who carried the stakes $1.50 a day. And for a 10-year-old kid to get $1.50 a day, when most people were working for $1 a day, adults. And I worked 2 days for him, and then my mother and my sister and I were to go back to Hedrick, 214 miles away. We were to go back home. We'd been up there for a couple of weeks, and Grandpa begged for me to stay. He said he needed me. He needed me. And so my dad had come to pick us up. My mother had agreed that would be okay, and so I stayed with what I needed to have. That was such a rich experience, because Grandpa taught me what to do with. Remember, it was 268 head of sheep among the rest of the livestock that he had. And he wanted me to take these sheep out early in the morning along the road, keep them out of the way so automobile traffic could go by. And every morning I took the sheep out, for I would keep the weeds down. But the fences were only stringed barbed wire. To do that, and Rags would go alongside me, and if the sheep would start going, I'd say, "Go get them, Rags." And Rags would go, and well, I did that every morning and every evening. You get up in the morning and do this before I come back, and then have breakfast. So I was important to my granddad. And then after I got those 10 days done, he agreed to give me board and room and $5 a month for the work that I would do. But he laughed at me, because he wondered why I would stand out he'd see me out with the sheep. And he said, "You always call me Bunk." He says, "Bunk, you always," and I don't know why, that was my nickname, Bunk. "Why did you always stand so straight?" I said, "Well, John Dillinger's running around loose, the criminal." Well, he was running loose, and I said I wanted to be sure that I could duck in case he was out running around up there. Well, Grandpa thought that was very funny.